Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Danish TV's English language TV channel, the global voice of the Center for Islam and Decoloniality. And today, again, it's a great honor and privilege for me to have uh, Professor Stephen Sheehi from the College of William and Mary. And I mentioned that college quite euphorically because that is also my alma mater where I graduated from and did my law school there as well. And Professor Stephen Sheehi's work is, spans so many disciplines and such a vast array of kind of intellectual research interests, from psychoanalysis to decolonial theory, Islamophobia. Some of his works include topics around the formation of Arab subjectivity and identity, Islamophobia, as I mentioned, and something that really reflects Professor Sheehi's, although he insists on me calling him Stephen, on Stephen's kind of incredibly eclectic and wide array of interests. His work on the visual arts and on Palestinian cinema and Arab cinema and so on and so forth. So we are incredibly blessed and honored to have you, Stephen, on the show today. So please welcome to our show.
Thank you, my brother. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for all the amazing work that you do.
Wonderful. Thank you. We wanted to touch on some very important topics. People in Pakistan and certainly our global viewership as well, including within the United States, when they get a chance to have a voice like yours, I think they desperately need it. And so we have some topics that we did want to speak about, particularly the way Zionism and the issue of Palestine is in the social and political imaginary of ordinary Americans, and how the trajectory of that since say 1945, since the Holocaust and so on to the present. What have we seen in those developments? However, as I mentioned to you before the show, I think it will be incredibly unjust of us to not, first of all, address what the latest Israeli reign of terror that has been waged against the Palestinians over the past few weeks, and perhaps then relating it back into the question of Zionism and its presence within the United States. So, if I can ask you, Stephen, to first of all give some of your reflections on kind of what has transpired. Has it been something different? Is it part of that same settler colonial project? So before I go on and on, I would please like for you to give some of your reflections.
Thank you, my brother. It's a great question, and I think a lot of your viewers have heard amazing analysis, partially from your show and elsewhere, about what's happening in occupied Palestine. And I think there are both things that seem new, but are kind of also old. So, on one hand, we want to talk about Zionism as a settler colonial project, right? It always has been a settler colonial project. And I think what we've witnessed over the past 10 years is a degeneration of the veneer that somehow Zionism has a liberal element or these sort of liberal aspirations, when actually we quite well know that from its inception, and even before its inception as a settler colonial state, the settler colonial project of Zionism has always been intent on the elimination of the Palestinians as the indigenous people of historical Palestine. So what we see now is really only the instantiation and the latest instantiation of violence against the indigenous people of Palestine, the Palestinians. So I think one thing that is newer is that what we have seen is over the people put pin it on Bibi, and Bibi's part of the I think the crack in the veneer, but also really, I mean, if we remember,
Bibi is referring to Netanyahu, yes.
Bibi Netanyahu, yes, the Intifada al-Aqsa, the second Intifada,
Yeah.
started with Ariel Sharon's visit
Yeah.
to al-Aqsa and provocation. And there has been a settler project ongoing within the 1948 boundaries of what is now known as Israel. But after 1967, that settler project continued, and it started most vociferously in Jerusalem and continues in Jerusalem, and then, of course, has, especially since also accelerated in what we now call the West Bank. So in one level, this is just a logical conclusion of this long-term project. It's a long-term intensification of the long-term project. And at one level, like Donald Trump here and most rightist movements, whether it's in India or Hungary or Brazil or United States or the state now known as Israel, the fascist element within those societies, within those ruling ideologies of their national identities, has come to the forefront and taken over dominant national discourse. So in India, for example, the myth of the Congress Party has actually completely exploded with the rise of the BJP, with the hegemony of the BJP, not just the rise, the hegemony of the BJP. The same thing in Israel. There is no Labor Party anymore. Israel as the product of the labor movement, right? That is the Historut project. I mean, that all the myths that we get, exactly. The new Jew and the Jewish labor and all that sort of stuff. All those Zionist myths that we glom onto as liberals in the West has now exploded over the past 20 years too, because of the rise of the right, but that right is actually inherent within the ideology of Zionism as a settler colonial project. So I think in that regard, it's nothing new, but it is an intensification. And just to finish up on this, because I don't want to take up too much time from the show, but I think it's incredibly important to see, for example, what's happening today.
Yeah.
Right. Monday, I think it's Monday, right? The 24th of May, where inside the 1948 borders of Israel, what the state now we know as Israel, Israeli Palestinian citizens are being rounded up. So that it further cracks this myth of somehow you have non-Israeli subjects of Israeli power in the West Bank under occupation, non-citizens, and then you have those non-citizens in Jerusalem. But you have the citizens, the Arab citizens, the Palestinian citizens of Israel who have rights. Well, we actually know that they don't. We know that they're not, and that's why Israel is an apartheid state. Right. What has been punctuated over the past 4 months was B'Tselem's, pronouncement that an acknowledgement that something we all know, and Palestinians have been saying this forever, that it is an apartheid state. And HRW, Human Rights Watch, which is a very conservative, very mainstream international human rights group, who basically said that Israel is an apartheid state because it is a state of Jewish dominance, Jewish supremacy. So I think what we see here, especially with the rounding up of Palestinians today who have Israeli settler colonial citizenship, targeted by the Zionist state, we see a further degeneration of this myth of Zionism as anything other than a settler colonial project with the intent to eliminate the indigenous people, the Palestinians, from Palestine.
Absolutely, and I'm so glad that you emphasized what's going on, because I think you'll agree with me that one of the principal components of the Zionist strategy has been to fragment the Palestinians. So you have the Palestinians, the Israeli Arabs, or the Palestinians living within Israel, which are relatively better off, very relatively, than the ones in the West Bank, which then become relatively better than the ones in Gaza. And I think that one of the things that we see, one of the perhaps positive outcomes, is that there was tremendous unity in against the Zionist form of terror that they unleashed over the past few weeks amongst these groups, where the attempt was to deeply factionalize all of these groups. And so this may be one of the signs of hope.
Mhm.
And clearly the old, as you were saying, the idea from the beginning was the transfer, ethnic cleansing, since they can't
Mhm.
wipe them out. And
Mhm.
although, of course, you have a massive refugee population, the
Mhm.
Palestinians are still there. The
Yes.
Palestinians are still there, and the resistance still continues. So I'm glad that we could start off with addressing with this issue that obviously is ongoing and obviously deserves our international support and solidarity. But I wanted to then link this up with what we wanted to discuss in this show, and that is within the United States itself, where
Mhm.
you've done
Mhm.
a lot of your own research on this question, kind of how Zionists have been able to exert such enormous and overwhelming influence on the public debate, on
Mhm.
policy circles. There's always the debate within the United States after
Mhm.
the book Walter Mar. I mean, we had it before, but of course, Marsheimer and Walt's book,
Mhm.
the Israel Lobby, etc. So there's always that debate, but beyond the
Mhm.
debate of kind of okay, which who's wagging the dog,
Mhm.
and if what to what extent does the Israeli government influence U.S. policy towards
Mhm.
Israel and
Mhm.
the Middle East? But beyond that, domestically within the United States, the capturing of the imagination by Israelis, by Zionists, etc. Um, the process of how that has unfolded and where that has left the Palestinians, the question of
Mhm.
Palestine and how Americans have perceived Palestinians. I think that many of our viewers would be interested in that if you could address that.
Oh, this is a great question. And I think, at one level, probably because I think you're familiar with my work, that I certainly argue against, the Israeli uh, tail wagging the U.S.
Yeah,
Dog. And I think that,
yeah,
it's incredibly important for us to return to this point of the settler colonialism. And that is, U.S. is a settler colonial society as well.
yes,
Right? It's a society built on racial capitalism. It's a society built on racism and racial hierarchies, and it's a society built on the elimination of the indigenous peoples of Turtle Island, what is now North America. And I think that to me there is a symbiotic sympathy
right,
within American identity for Israel. And I've
yeah,
said before that, Israel is just a little mini US,
yeah,
right? It's arrogant, it's
absolutely,
powerful, it's ruthless, it has pretense to democracy, pretense to liberalism. It loves looking at itself in the mirror,
right.
as at the same time it
That
crushes,
that same narcissistic personality disorder is
narcissistic but psychotic too, right?
yes, psychotic. Right, right. Absolutely.
And so I think there's a symbiotic and sympathy, but also because Mersheimer and Walt will make the argument that the United States acts against its own interest in supporting the Israel. That argument actually was a predominant argument among U.S. Arabists,
Yes.
Arab policymakers between 1948 and 1967, right? That kind of,
Yeah.
don't get the Arabs angry. We have to, because the Cold War and da 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 da. So we want to sort of,
Exactly.
be careful how we manage the Arabs. And I think,
Yeah.
so
This
I
is
think
what
there's a
we can call the Aramco generation. Yeah.
right the Aramco generation, the anti, Arabist
Yes.
generation, where US and CIA was cultivating
Of
the
course.
Muslim Brotherhood. At the 1970s, Brzezinski and Carter come up with the Ark of Islam, as they called it, to sort of like cultivate political Islam, right? So it wasn't so clear. But on the other hand, you ask, why would they work against their
Right.
interests? And I don't think that's the question. I think it's a wrong question. I think
Right.
the United States, it supports Israel as a settler colonial state because it sees itself in it,
Yeah.
right? But with that said, the moment today is a different moment. We feel this, right? We feel that people in the United States on the mass level are identifying with the Palestinian people, not only sympathy,
Right.
but actually sympathizing with liberation, that Palestinians are oppressed peoples and they are subjects of apartheid and they deserve to be liberated. This is a massive, massive, massive shift, even for 10 years, right? Where you might have people being sympathetic to people in Gaza, etc. You shouldn't put people in open air jails.
Right.
And I think we need to ascribe that to a number of different factors. One, the Palestinians and Arabs and Arab Americans and Muslim Americans who have been working for the Palestinian liberation for decades in this country, they've built the basis for that. And they've successfully separated it from the accusation of anti-Semitism, right? Those people who are clearly articulating support for the Palestinian people have really come out clear and saying that this is an anti-racist, anti-colonialist battle, and has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. In fact, you should be against anti-Semitism. Anti-racist struggles are intertwined within the let's call it anti-Israel, I would say pro-Palestinian struggle. And I think so.
But and that's although despite, we both agree, despite the fact that elites, both within the U.S., the U.K. will do their absolute best, no matter how many times Muslims and Arabs will make it very clear this is an anti-racist struggle, has nothing to do with the Jews and so on. They will continue to paint it, and we see this going on. Full scale in these countries to paint this with an anti-Semitic brush. So we see that pushback, a very strong pushback.
Right. Absolutely. And I think we can talk about that when we speak a little bit more about Islamophobia. But what I just want to do is also center Palestinians in this struggle at this moment and the success that they have been doing and Arab Americans and Muslim Americans have been working for decades. Then secondly, is because of this idea of liberation, the Black Lives Matter movement over the past 5-6 years or more actually, that recognizes the intersection between anti-Black structures of power in this country and how this country works for anti-Muslim, anti-Brown, anti-Palestinian structures in Israel. And I think so that the Palestine to the Ferguson to Palestine moniker really has brought home this solidarity. I think Muslim American activists like Linda Sarsour or Sumaya Awad and Fatima Al-Khan in Muslim Advocates and Fahad Ahmed in Drum in New York have really articulated a radical progressive Muslim stance too. They've broken away from the care sort of exchange, as Robin Kelly says, sort of exchange model of solidarity, right? You support me, I'll support you. These brothers, sisters, and siblings believe in anti-racism. They believe in the liberation of Palestine. They understand what Islamophobia is about, and it's their movement. All these movements together, and of course, then it is Jewish, progressive American Jews who finally come to the place where they can overtly and outwardly say, because they have inwardly said that their opposition to Zionist policies. They have now been coming to collect themselves as a group to say not in my name, etc. To say that Zionism does not represent me. To dissociate Israel from Judaism, and I think these things together
is really important. I think this is what the Zionist elite call the crisis in Zionism. Is
absolutely
new young generation of Jews in America and elsewhere are no longer buying that Zionist narrative, and I don't think that another generation of Jews will come and start to support more and more settler colonial violence. So I think this is when they speak about the crisis going on. It's precisely what you're saying. More and more Jews, perhaps even the majority now of young Jews, are either indifferent or hostile to what Israel is doing. You're absolutely right.
And I agree. And, I think that, I've been teaching for 25 years now. My time at William & Mary has been a joy. I have had moving experiences with my Jewish American students who have confront the crisis in their own homes, right? The political crisis, who are proud to be Jews, who are proud of the Jewish tradition, and who maybe see that the identity as cultural or maybe religious, but they've really engaged us in ways, and it's so inspiring to me, who's grown up in a country that is largely, anti-Arab, Islamophobic, anti-Palestinian. I'm Lebanese, and I grew up in the '80s, so they were the Lebanese, and so and you really couldn't articulate these things. So I think these things, Black Lives Matter, SJP, and then on campus, the Jewish Voices for Palestine separating themselves from even something like, J Street, which is a soft Zionist group, right? So all of these things, I think, have really galvanized this particular moment, and recognizing the work that Palestinians are doing in Palestine as well.
That's right.
And that's what we're seeing today. We have to remember that Zionist violence is vociferous and continuing, but the work of the Palestinians at every level of society, regardless of their political positions, is inspirational and sustained, and they have resilience and power in ways that every time I go there, I'm moved.
Absolutely, no question about it. One thing that just occurred to me, Stephen, is that there continues to remain so much confusion, and perhaps Walton Marsheimer contributed somewhat to that, is when this Israel lobby. First of all, I mean, and correct me if I'm mistaken. I mean, it seems like this quote unquote lobby, the kind of what you can, an extension of AIPAC, etc. But it's not just that; it's liberal, the elites from the New York Times, etc. One of the main functions, if not the main function, is to police debate on the question of Palestine on campuses and so on within the United States. Rather than the way they're portraying it as controlling U.S. foreign policy. But this has been really and that's very visible. I mean, you must have seen it. I certainly saw it, being involved in Students for Justice in Palestine and so on. But the real question I wanted to ask is that the Zionist influence in the United States, at this point, it is not just what we used to hear all the time. Okay, well, AIPAC. I mean, the forces that in the U.S. that are supportive of Israel are not just AIPAC. You have Christian Zionism.
Absolutely.
And it's on a side note, which I was surprised. I was in Malaysia there teaching for a little while, and you had fairly sizable Christian Zionist movement there, which I was just shocked. But so you have that. You have Israel conservatives. You have So I think it's also important for that these nuances to be introduced, because otherwise you would just fall into the trap as if there's just something sitting in Washington D.C. and they're the ones that are just the ones in commanding the U.S. government to be just so pro-Israel.
Right, absolutely, and that's the sort of the anti-Semitic trope of Jews control the United States or whatever, or the trilateral committees, jobs like that. And I think what's really important for us, and that what you're alluding to, I think, is that support for Israel is an ideological phenomenon.
Right.
There are plenty of lobbies in this country. Yes, AIPAC has a lot of money and a lot of influence. But what happens? I mean, do you think that if there were an Arab lobby or a Muslim lobby with that much money, they would be doing the same thing? No. Why? Because this is a racist country, and there is something that brings together. And this is what's amazing, and this is what you were alluding to. What brings together Jewish liberals, neocons, Trumpists, and Christian Zionists, and even Black evangelical liberals, who might talk about Black liberation, What is it that and sort of secularists, So what what is it that brings it together? Why? Is it money? No, it's the fact that the United States is an imperialist regime that identifies with this little Western white colony.
Yes.
They disavow their own anti-Semitism.
Right.
Right? The fact that Israel was created because Jews didn't feel safe because they were genocided in Europe by Europeans,
right? Yes.
Right? This sort of internal political and psychological mechanism that puts them there and wants to make contrition. Yes. But by doing that, disavowing the fact that you, West, made anti-Semitism, you are the anti-Semites, right? So there's a lot of sort of ideological sort of things going on here, right? And I think what you said actually was really important too, is identifying the elites.
Yeah.
And this is what's cracking now. This collusion between economic, political, and governmental elites in maintaining the status quo of the United States, right, supporting their ally in the Middle East, which they need because then they want to control, you know, the Arabs and the Muslim world, is being pushed against by a popular movement.
Right.
Right. It's a popular movement,
right,
across the base, across, you know, the United States. And I think this is the crisis that you're talking about within Judaism, but it's also the crisis within the American polity, right?
Absolutely.
And that's the thing. So, you know, Schumer, who hates Trump, and Kushner and Cheney and, you know, and George Bush, who's now been, you know, repurposed to being the good Republican. All these folks, you know, Romney, everyone can all sit in a room with Pelosi and everybody else and pat each other on the back when it comes to Israel, right? But we see that the groundswell is pushing up against that, and the groundswell is clearly not anti-Semitic. It's clearly political. It's clearly ethical, and I think this is the hope that we have for the future, right?
Absolutely.
And this is what this moment is about.
It's at grassroots. It's making its inroads into Congress as well. Mm-hmm. It's also making its inroads into Congress, and we must. I highlight this all the time. At least in my lifetime, it was the first time that during the presidential primary debates, it was, I believe, the first time a Democratic primary, one of the Democratic primary candidates, did not attend the AIPAC, you know, their annual whatever get together. Right. So, I mean, you could say it's symbolic, but it's significant. It's very significant in the way that they've had that hold. So, no, I think these shifts are incredibly important for our viewership and for us to understand, and then to kind of also comprehend the difficulties that the American elites will also continue to confront in the future with this increasing popular resentment towards what the Israeli state is doing. And since we kind of have to rush it a little bit, I did want to get in your significant and excellent work on the question of Islamophobia, and particularly the way you focus on it, how it functions in the United States, how it gives an ideological justification the same way, you know, Said wrote about or the Orientalist enterprise and its ideological justification for colonialism and so on. But yes, if you can kind of share some of your reflections on that topic.
Well, I think it's a great, and just to sort of transition from what we were saying, right? That there's this mass popular movement now for Palestine and for Black lives that is happening in this country. You know, there's also the threat of the counter insurgency, right? How are the elites, how are the power, the establishment coming to come back? How are they going to get control of the narrative again? How does Israel get control of the narrative? And we can see this, right? Part of it is through Islamophobic tropes, right? And that, and you know, of course, Hamas, right? And that is, you know, Hamas is a terrorist organization. Hamas wants to Islamify Palestine. Hamas, I just heard on I think the BBC, and BBC has been doing an abysmal job. I mean, they're usually bad, you know, but better than U.S. media outlets. They have been doing a shameful job. I'm being shocked every morning. I heard just someone that they were saying that Hamas wants to Islamify all Arab countries around them, right? I mean, just ridiculous stuff like this, and this sort of painting the Muslim threat as if even if this were true. If this were true, right, then they deserve to be annihilated. The fact that and of course, when you're a Muslim, you have, and if you're a Muslim who believes in political Islam, then of course, then you forfeit your right to humanity.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think forget about free speech, but yes, your own humanity.
Nothing.
Yeah, right.
No speech, no rights. I mean, Abu Ghraib is still there. Black sites, torture, drones. What Muslim militants have, and again, this is to be fair. I'm a leftist, but I'm a secularist in many ways. But this is not to say that we have to understand political Islam as a political formation and something that comes out of anti-imperialist tradition, And these militants, whether they're ISIS or Qaeda or Hamas or whomever, and they are completely different, mind you. We know that.
Of course, absolutely.
Somehow they get disqualified from having any rights.
Right.
They're disqualified from their humanity. And that is the function of Islamophobia. So nowadays you have less Islamophobia than you did 5 months ago coming from the White House, because Biden is all about the status quo. And Biden has far too good taste and propriety to say all the nasty stuff that Trump would have said, right? But still, the counter-terrorist discourse that structures U.S. policy, regardless of the administration, is always predicated on the fact that we can kill Muslims without impunity and somehow when they become militant, they lose all sense of any humanity or rights. And so this how the quieter functions in which Islamophobia works, even because when you have one person like Trump being a complete racist, and then the other people being like, no, Muslims are good, you can be a good American and a Muslim at the same time. Well, thank you very much. As long as you don't, join the Qaeda, and then we're going to have to drone bomb you and your family and your grandchildren and wreck your whole village and probably poison it with uranium for the next 4 generations. Right?
Absolutely. So and in fact, I mean, I'll say this, that I mean, in some ways, it's akin to what we speak about, what Saeed spoke about, kind of, the soft form of Orientalism, soft Orientalism and hard Orientalism. We speak of soft Islamophobia and hard, in the sense of Islamophobia being, yes, that ideological justification for the United States to do what it has been doing, and we're talking about the killing of millions, the displacement of millions, and so on and so forth. That can only happen with an ideological dehumanization of a people and of Muslim culture, the Muslim religion, and so on and so forth. But also, then I think about what Said's hard Orientalism and hard Islamophobia, in which Islamophobia, in some ways, or for that matter, Islam, almost becomes constitutive of the West itself.
Absolutely.
Of the West itself, that there cannot be a Europe and there cannot be a West without Islam. Without Islam being there. And I think that in that sense, Islamophobia also emerges in response to this real sentiment that these Muslims have not really undergone the process of kind of that the 19th century sociologists predicted this, so they will act and walk, their religion will look like ours, and everything will be just like us. So they have not actually fit the bill, and therefore that grand Eurocentric story, as Professor Said says, from Plato to NATO, that kind of has been interrupted at this point. And so I think that the crisis of the American elites is a larger crisis of whiteness of the West itself, in that sense. And so I think studying Islamophobia in the United States, and of course it's different from Europe, but I think that it gives us a lens through which to see how the world in fact is going through an age of transition and this brings us to our the colonial theory, in the sense that, while Said traces Orientalism to 1798 and the French invasion of Egypt, we like to look at the long 16th century, 1492, and the consequences of that for indigenous peoples all throughout the world, for Africans whose bodies were enslaved, etc., and for the epistemicide, the destruction of the knowledge structures of communities throughout the world, including Muslims, etc.
Right.
So, just ending on that note, decolonial theory, Stephen, what does it mean to you right now, and what does the praxis of that actually look like?
Right. That's a great question. And it's so difficult because I just taught a class actually called "What is Decolonization?" And I teach this in the Middle Eastern Studies class, but here I am also at the same time living on, on stolen land, right? Actually in the epicenter in Williamsburg, the epicenter.
First permanent settlement.
The first permanent settlement, which is, and a settlement where there actually was indigenous resistance and then extermination.
Yes.
Right. So it's a tough thing, and I think I think you've pointed it to the crux, and it's hard because I also don't want to get too academic. But what you did say is that colonialism has constructed us in all these sorts of different ways, and so decolonial theory and decolonial praxis will never be one thing. But it always, what it does do, it centers the colonized. Right, and thinking about our experiences, and it thinks about the ways we have been ingrained to think particular ways, and not only ingrained to think as a sort of brainwash, but the ways we interpret a reality that when we receive it. Right, what is the sort of, so that also means the oppositions and contradictions and options that we have, even the options that we have. Right,
exactly.
Support U.S., not support U.S., liberalism, not liberalism. All these are contained within realms of thought that we have been raised in, and that contain us, which is a result of colonialism. And so, for me, decoloniality is about two things. I mean, if you want to talk about it from indigenous life in what is now known as North America, or Palestine, or India and Pakistan, right?
Yeah.
South Asia or wherever. It's about disrupting the modes in which we have been ingrained to think, the epistemologies of knowledge, how we are forced to think, and the options that we have, the possibilities, to even disrupt the possibilities of resistance. Right? How do we resist? Well, we have to think new ways. And then secondly is to produce new futures. Right? To produce new futures by also, if I could just bring this back to Palestine, or the Black Lives Matter, is to produce new futures, to acknowledge all the work that our peoples have been doing forever.
Yes.
Right? Since colonialism, right? Under the British in South Asia, right? In anti-racist, anti-slavery, abolitionist work that has been a part of Black life in North America, right? Resistance in Palestine forever to Zionist colonization, right? So I think for me, decoloniality is to question the ways we think whiteness works, how we identify ourselves through a white prism, but also then to think about how do we disrupt the hegemony of whiteness? How do we, and that means disrupt the hegemony of a race. Right? How we ourselves as brown, we're always looking at Black folk in a certain way, or right? We have to question our own inherent racism that comes from these traditions.
That's right.
And then disrupt them and think about how that disruption will produce new possibilities and new futures for us.
Absolutely. That's a great. These are great points actually to end on, and you will. I will apologize in advance, but I have to say, Professor Stephen Sheehi, this was an incredible treat and delight for us to have you on the show this time. And we've taken your time; it's very precious time. The work you do inspires so many of us. You should know that, and we will certainly try to arm twist you to get you on the show again, because the insights you provide are absolutely phenomenal. So, Stephen, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you, my brother. Thank you, my brother, and thank you for your whole team for all the work that they do.
Take care.